Part 15. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wu Nian. Chapter 141. These rubbles are also made of binary, but compared to the data codes possessed by real planets, the code structure of these rubbles is much simpler. But it doesn't matter. There is no code, Chen Tao can rewrite it. Just do it. Chen Tao cleared all the gravel codes disappeared, and the front became empty. Chen Tao wrote it again. The code of zeros and ones is written at a terrifying speed. It took Chen Tao an hour to write a planet. In front of Chen Tao, there is an additional planet made of blue code. Activate planetary programming. Activating. Activation successful. Testing the planet's operation and whether it is suitable for human habitation. Under testing, Chen Tao could see the planet made of blue code starting to rotate slowly. Testing completed. Test results, the location is suitable for human habitation. After getting the definite promise, Chen Tao withdrew from the other world. Time resumed its passage. This. An incredulous voice sounded from behind. Chen Tao glanced at Lei Hao beside him. Lei Hao's pupils were trembling and he was looking straight ahead. Chen Tao withdrew his gaze and looked forward. After exiting the inner world and returning to the outer world, Chen Tao can see the true appearance of the planet he programmed. In front is the planet. You can see blue and green colors on the planet. There are white clouds floating on it. You can see the blue ocean and green vegetation under the clouds. Katie's eyes were trembling slightly. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Did you just enter the other world and rewrite Grey Star?" Her eyes trembled, filled with disbelief. Chen Tao looked at Katie and said nothing. Chen Tao had heard from Lin before that both Katie and Rose could use the abilities of the Dragon King's Academy and the World Tree to enter the other world. Now in front of Katie, using the ability of the other world, naturally, Katie can know. This is not surprising. It would be strange if Katie didn't know. It's unbelievable. My God, Lei Hao shouted crazily as he swept towards the planet in front of him. His expression seemed like he wanted to hug the planet directly. Chen Tao looked at Lei Hao's back, his eyebrows slightly stretched. With the genetic ability of an individual, it is impossible to withstand the data processing required to program planets. Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, There is a celestial computer behind you, and its performance is better than that of Rose and me. Even more powerful. Chen Tao looked at Katie and said, "Of course, otherwise you think I rely on something to upgrade my genes." He had no intention of hiding it, after all, there was no need to hide it. Otherwise, things like Rose's World Tree and Katie's Dragon King's Academy would have been hidden by them long ago. Since there is no need to hide it now, there is even less need to hide it if she discovers it. Katie was startled, her eyes trembling slightly, and said, "It's incredible that there is such a powerful celestial computer in the known universe." "What's so strange about that?" Rose beside her said slowly. Katie looked at Rose. Rose crossed her arms, looked at Katie playfully, and said with a smile, "The man beside me is Chen Tao, a man whom Rose identifies with. He has a computer that is more powerful than the celestial computer you and I have. This isn't it reasonable?" Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, "Rose believes you can create a new universe. Does this confidence also come from that celestial computer?" Chen Tao looked at Katie's beautiful eyes, her eyes were full of questions. Chen Tao said, "I don't think it is necessary for me to answer your question." As he spoke, he looked away, and the ring on his finger turned into white light, fell on his back, and turned into white wings. He spread his wings and flew towards Lei Hao. Katie was slightly startled, and she looked at Chen Tao's back. Rose looked at Katie, she smiled and said, "In front of him, there is no king of dragons. Without the identity of king of dragons, then you are just an unrelated stranger in front of him. A stranger people are not qualified to know too many secrets." After saying that, Rose spread out the black wings behind her and flew away in the direction Chen Tao left. Katie looked at Rose's leaving back, her eyes glowing with luster, and she said to herself, a stranger. After thinking about it, she and Chen Tao really had no definite relationship, they could only be regarded as strangers. Katie sighed, unfolded the dragon wings behind her, and flew in the direction Rose left. Chen Tao flew into Leech Star and he could see Lei Hao. Lei Hao was kneeling on the ground, his head lowered. Chen Tao fell next to Lei Hao, and you could see that Lei Hao's face was covered with tears. The tears flowed down his mechanical metal face and dripped on the grass below. Lei Hao held 2 handfuls of soil with grass in his hands tightly. Ah, Grey Star, you are finally alive, you are finally alive. I have been waiting for you for 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000 years, and you are finally alive. Lei Hao shouted and cried. It can be seen that Lei Hao's mood has collapsed. Looking at the scene in front of him, Chen Tao seemed to be able to feel Lei Hao's emotions. A mistake in his experiment split the entire planet in half, killing hundreds of millions of compatriots and destroying his home planet. For him, this kind of painful self-blame is incomprehensible to ordinary people. And he had to be tortured by this pain for 1,000,000 years, and now he finally saved his home planet. It is reasonable that pain and joy melted and emotions burst. Chen Tao raised his head and looked at the sun in the distance. For Chen Tao, righting a planet with life is easy. But for other people in this universe, such a thing does not exist at all, and its difficulty is simply beyond words. And what Chen Tao did casually could make such a guy who has lived for millions of years feel such a big shock. Chen Tao retracted his gaze and looked at Lei Hao. This can be regarded as a good thing. Lei Hao lay on the ground, his whole body was dirty with mud, but he didn't seem to care. What is he doing? Rose's voice sounded. Chen Tao looked back at Rose, and Rose's eyes were full of doubts. Katie also landed. She looked at Lei Hao and remained silent. Chen Tao said lightly, we still cannot understand the feeling of meeting the mother planet again after 1,000,000 years. It seems that we have to wait until his emotions are more stable before we can talk about the Lydian technology transaction later. After that, Chen Tao looked at Rose and said, let's go back first. Rose smiled, looked at Chen Tao, and said, I will listen to you. Chen Tao said, good boy. He raised his hand, opened a micro wormhole, and stepped into the micro wormhole. Rose and Katie followed him in. The micro wormhole disappeared. The 3 disappeared into Grey Star. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 142. Chen Tao returned to the bedroom. After arriving in the bedroom, he sat down on the sofa and looked ahead. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the blue sky and white clouds outside. As the fragrance around her came, Rose slowly came closer and rested her little head on Chen Tao's arm. Chen Tao gently held her slender waist with his hands, feeling her body temperature. Rose got close to Chen Tao and kissed Chen Tao on the cheek. She smiled and said, I'm going to take a bath. Chen Tao said, go. Rose stood up, twisted her waist, and left. After Rose left, there were only 2 people left in the bedroom, one was Chen Tao and the other was Katie. Katie looked at Chen Tao who was sitting on the sofa. She walked to the sofa in front of Chen Tao, sat up, crossed her legs, looked at Chen Tao, and said, can I see your celestial computer? Hearing this, Chen Tao's eyes fell on Katie. Chen Tao looked at Katie and fell into thought. Rose doesn't know about Nebula, so can Katie know? Katie is the king of dragons. She has lived for a long time. If we want to say that in this known universe, the person who knows the most about this known universe, I believe that Katie is second. No one dares to say first. Maybe Katie can know something. Chen Tao said, there is no need to see it, you just need to know that I have a celestial computer that can create the universe. Katie pursed her lower lip and looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao said, the name of that computer is Nebula. Where do you think Nebula comes from? Upon hearing this, Katie's eyes glowed, and she looked at Chen Tao. You don't know where it comes from. Chen Tao was silent for a moment, and he said, I used to be just an ordinary person in the slums of Earth Star. At that time, I was robbed and stabbed. Then, inexplicably, my genes were upgraded and activated at the same time. Nebula. Katie frowned, in other words, genetic binding. When Chen Tao heard this, he looked at Katie, gene binding. Katie said calmly, the celestial computer needs to be bound to the operating system before it can be used. There are many ways to bind the operating system. A situation like yours that you activate only when you are about to die means that you are genetically modified. Bound, the genes in your body have been bound to Nebula's operating system since you were a child. That is to say, someone injected the genes of the operating system into your body when you were very young. Chen Tao's eyebrows suddenly wrinkled, and goosebumps appeared all over his body. He said, you mean, someone created Nebula, and that person gave me the ownership of Nebula? This is the only possibility. Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, but, what's very strange is that, as far as I know, this kind of technology does not exist in the known universe. It shouldn't. Unless. Katie frowned. Chen Tao looked at Katie and said, unless. Katie looked at Chen Tao seriously and said, unless the other person is from the future. Chen Tao felt his brain and scalp numb. He stared at Katie and said, you mean, Nebula is a technology from the future? Do you mean time travel? Katie said, the only possibility I can imagine is this. If the Nebula is technology from the future, then everything can be explained. Time travel, future technology. Chen Tao frowned. Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, I have a way to judge whether my guess is correct. What can we do? Chen Tao looked at Katie. You can ask that celestial computer, Cardi said. If it really is from the future, then it may have the ability to time jump. In other words, as long as Chen Tao asks Nebula, he will know whether Katie's judgment is right or wrong. Thinking of this, Chen Tao's heart beat faster and he clenched his fists. Katie's judgment is too crazy, but I have to say that Katie's judgment makes sense. Realizing this, Chen Tao calmed down. Xingyun. What are your orders, master? Chen Tao said, I want to ask you something, can you jump in time? After asking this question, Chen Tao held his breath. Can and can't. If possible, then Chen Tao can determine where the nebula comes from. But if nebula really comes from the future, then there will be a big problem. Nebula has the ability to travel through time, so nebula has the ability to jump in time. Nebula's mechanical voice sounded in Chen Tao's head. Chen Tao felt goosebumps all over his body. Chen Tao's face turned pale. Katie couldn't hear the conversation between Chen Tao and Xingyun, but looking at Chen Tao's pale face, Katie seemed to realize something. Katie said, what's the result? Chen Tao said, you guessed it right, nebula can indeed travel through time. Really? Katie frowned. But why do people who came to this era from the future bind nebula to me? Chen Tao frowned. Everything has a cause and effect, and Chen Tao doesn't think that the other party just bound nebula to him just for fun. Perhaps, that person knows what the universe will experience in this era. Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, the other person may want to lend your hand to save the universe. Chen Tao thought for a moment. Is it to let Chen Tao deal with the invasion of the Cod aliens? Or is it to deal with the invasion of elemental bodies? Yeah. Chen Tao doesn't know. Suddenly, Chen Tao had a crazy idea. He said, Xingyun, do you have any records of your previous time jumps on your body? Did the person who injected Nebula's operating system into Chen Tao also use Nebula? If it is Nebula, then the record of Nebula's time jump will most likely be that person's record. In this case, Chen Tao can use the time jump method to travel to the day when the person injected the operating system into Chen Tao's body, so that he can find that person. There are no records of time jumps in Nebula's database. Nebula's mechanical voice sounded slowly. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao fell silent. Sure enough, things couldn't go so smoothly. It's possible that what that person used for time travel was not Nebula. Even if it was Nebula, that person was not a fool. How could he not be aware of the records left by the time jump? Chen Tao just asked with a sense of luck. Although the result was disappointing, it was within expectation. Relax, I believe, that person must have a reason for doing what he did. Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, what you have to do is waiting for a place in the known universe where you can be useful. Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Katie. Katie looked at Chen Tao, her face turned slightly red, and she said, that question can be put aside for now. The most important question now is, are you really not interested in me? Am I really not beautiful? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 143. Chen Tao never expected that as soon as the topic changed, Katie would turn the topic to herself. Chen Tao was stunned for a moment and looked at Katie. Isn't Katie beautiful? No, Katie has a face like an angel and a figure like a devil. If she is not beautiful, then there probably is no beautiful girl in the known universe. Katie's holy, dignified, noble and elegant temperament matches her face and figure. Breathtakingly beautiful. In terms of appearance, Chen Tao has never seen anyone who can match Katie. But the question is, can something like love be defined based on appearance? Chen Tao looked at Katie and said, I don't know how your dragon civilization treats relationships, but I don't treat relationships just because of appearance, so we can be together casually. He stood up and said, we've finished chatting. I think it's time for you to go back. With that said, Chen Tao didn't intend to talk to Katie and walked towards the bed. Do you think I'm looking for you because I like your face? Katie's voice came from behind Chen Tao. Chen Tao paused slightly, turned his face slightly and looked at Katie behind him. Katie stood up slightly. She looked at Chen Tao and said, we girls from the dragon civilization are all devoted. We will remain loyal to our lovers until death. Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, ever since you collected my molecules from the corners of the universe and reshaped my body, you are an unusual existence in my heart. In order to get to know you, I used the Dragon King's Academy to do a little bit of research on you. Katie said, you are an ordinary person who has gained unknown power. You are very ordinary, but also very special. You always say, you don't care about anything but yourself. But in fact, your kindness always allows you to help others at critical times. Being chased by the Black Swan, and even in danger of your life several times, you didn't use Nebula to kill them directly. Isn't that because of your kindness? Katie looked at Chen Tao. Bai Yao, told you, that you kind, strong, masculine and powerful, whether physically strong, or mentally strong. Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, if I, Katie, are looking for a man in the known universe who can lead the dragon civilization with me, that person must be you. Chen Tao was silent for a moment. He looked into Katie's eyes. Through Katie's eyes, he saw her determination. She means it? Chen Tao withdrew his gaze and turned his back to Katie. Katie said, frankly speaking, I have never studied love, this ethereal thing, nor have I let anyone study it. I don't understand what love is, but I know that when you take me from mental prison the cage was released, and when I opened my eyes and saw you for the first time, my heart beat faster than when I was fighting. When you ignore me, my heart feels like it's being squeezed by a big hand, and I feel uncomfortable. Katie looked at Chen Tao's back and said, I don't know what it feels like. I only know that if I leave without explaining my feelings to you clearly, I will regret it for the rest of my life. Ba bang bang. Suddenly, applause sounded. Hear this and applaud. Katie looked towards the source of the sound. Rose was seen clapping her hands with a playful smile on her face. She looked at Katie and said with a smile, I didn't expect that Katie, the king of dragons, has a unique way of talking about love. Katie's face turned red. She looked back at Chen Tao's back. She moved and disappeared. It feels like running away. Feeling the wormhole fluctuation behind him, Chen Tao looked back at the place where Katie disappeared. Dear, at this time, Rose walked up to Chen Tao. She looked into Chen Tao's eyes and said with a smile, what are your plans? Hearing this, Chen Tao's eyes fell on Rose. Rose had just finished taking a shower. She was wearing a black silk nightgown. The close-fitting nightgown fit her flawless figure. She held her waist and her bust was amazing. The pair of long legs measuring 1 meter and 2 below were wrapped in black fishnet stockings. Chen Tao's eyes fell on Rose's face, looking at her beautiful face. He put his arms around her waist, pulled her into his arms, looked at her face, and said, what do you think I should do, what to do? Rose looked at Chen Tao, she showed a playful smile and said, now, as the former king of the Black Demon, I am yours. If you can make the king of the dragon civilization, who possesses the most powerful technology in the known universe, if I become yours, I think, my dear, you will be the true king of the known universe. Chen Tao was startled. He looked at Rose and said, you want me to promise her? She is your mortal enemy. I heard that she killed you 5 times. Rose pursed her lips and smiled, and said, what's that? After reaching the 3rd generation of gene bodies, people will not die. She only scattered my genes 5 times, and I regarded it as sleeping. Times. To me, it doesn't matter. And I'm very interested. Rose put her hands around Chen Tao's neck, looked at Chen Tao, and said, Cardi is a stubborn ice woman. She is finally serious. I am very curious. When she becomes your woman, will she change? Will she become submissive like other women after meeting the man they love? Hearing this, Chen Tao stretched his eyebrows slightly, scratched the bridge of her nose with his fingers, and said, you are a big bad guy. Rose chuckled. Chen Tao is thinking. Frankly speaking, Rose's idea is crazy, no wonder Rose will become the queen of chaos. Her thoughts are crazy. Chen Tao doesn't have such crazy ideas as her. However, thinking of what Katie just said, Chen Tao was silent for a while. Dear, can you accompany me? Rose looked at Chen Tao's eyes expectantly. Chen Tao smiled and said, let's talk about it in the evening. I have to go out for a walk. Okay. Rose was a little disappointed. Chen Tao let go of Rose and walked out the door. Out the door. He came to the deck of base number 1, standing on the deck, he looked at the sky above. Chen Tao was thinking about what to do. At this moment, a voice sounded in Chen Tao's mind. Master. It was the voice of T1 android. Chen Tao said, what's the matter? The man named Lei Hao is here again. Lei Hao? Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, and he almost forgot about him. Is he here? In other words, he has adjusted his mood. Chen Tao said, bring him here. Okay. Not long after, a micro wormhole appeared next to Chen Tao. T1 android walked out of the micro wormhole. Following behind T1 android was Lei Hao. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 144. As soon as Lei Hao saw Chen Tao, a smile appeared on his face and he said, Brother Chen, well, I should call you my benefactor. Lei Hao showed a hearty smile on his square face and said, Benefactor, I have to thank you this time. Seeing Lei Hao's happy look, Chen Tao said, it's just a matter of a finger. Lei Hao said, that's not a piece of cake. What you did is what our entire gray civilization has wanted to do for millions of years. You saved our home planet. Then you are our benefactor. After speaking, Lei Hao raised his hand, opened his palm, and found a white diamond-shaped crystal in his hand. Chen Tao could vaguely see small codes carved on the rhombus crystal. Lei Hao looked at Chen Tao and said, "This is the thunder and lightning technology that I have gained from studying thunder and lightning throughout my life. My original intention in studying thunder and lightning is to protect my home planet from enemies, who knows, ugh." Lei Hao looked at Chen Tao and said, "From that time on, I wanted to destroy all these technologies, but, in my opinion, these things are like my children, and I can't let go of them. This time this thunder and lightning, if I can hand over technology to my benefactor and let him help me restore my home planet, I will be able to make up for it." Chen Tao raised his hand and took the rhombus crystal handed over by Lei Hao. Chen Tao pressed his hand slightly. The rhombus-shaped crystal slowly unfolds. Picture after picture appeared. There are many scenes here, including both Chen Tao and Lei Hao. Chen Tao looked at the pictures floating in mid-air around him. These pictures all recorded the difficulty of using thunder and lightning. It's just that there are too many, so it would be a bit troublesome to get them. Currently, I have condensed these thunder and lightning technologies into an engine. I call it a thunder and lightning engine. Lei Hao looked at Chen Tao and said, "Inject the engine into human genes, and people will have the power to use thunder and lightning." There are instructions for making engines in the picture records. Chen Tao nodded slightly, shook his hand, and the rhombus crystal returned to its original shape. Chen Tao looked at Lei Hao and said, "Okay, then I've received this." Lei Hao nodded slightly and said, "Brother Chen, you are my benefactor. If there is any need, even if Lei Hao dies, I, Lei Hao, will not have any complaints." He looked solemn and looked at Chen Tao with respectful eyes. Chen Tao said, "I have no interest in your life. You should go back and protect your gray star." When Lei Hao heard this, he laughed, "That's right, then I'll take my leave first." Lei Hao saluted Chen Tao, then opened the micro wormhole, entered the wormhole and left. His back looked much more relaxed than when he first came. Chen Tao looked at Lei Hao's back. Lei Hao was in too much pain from the pressure of self-blame. It was originally intended to be researched on weapons to protect one's home planet, but accidentally split one's own home planet into two pieces. This kind of thing is probably something that no one can accept. Now, from a certain perspective, the mother planet can be regarded as saved by the technology he invented. For him, it can be regarded as a kind of atonement. Chen Tao didn't think much about it. Now Chen Tao still has a problem to solve. Katie. What to do with her? Chen Tao asked about his heart and got the answer. Although Chen Tao is not sure what his feelings are like, he will not be happy if he assumes that Katie, who has confessed to him, leaves with another man. In this case, why give Katie the chance to leave him? Thinking of this, Chen Tao disappeared from the spot. In the bedroom of Kati, the king of dragons in Dragon City. Katie changed her clothes and stood in front of the full-length mirror in a luxurious nightgown. The nightgown is white and decorated with luxurious gold patterns. The fabric is pressed against the figure of the woman in the mirror. The woman in the mirror has a curvy figure, her skirt outlines her slender waist, and her bust is amazing. The lower legs are slender and straight, and paired with the luxurious high-heeled boots, the whole person looks even more tall and beautiful. A face that is exquisite and beautiful. The skin is as white as gelatin. The woman in the mirror is dignified and elegant, and her temperament is extremely beautiful. Katie looked at herself in the mirror, her eyes glowing with luster. Katie doesn't quite understand. How can she be inferior to the other women around Chen Tao? Why did Chen Tao choose them but not accept her? Thinking of the fact that he had said those love words in front of Chen Tao just now, and that his old enemy Rose had heard them. Katie couldn't help but blush, and she said, "Really, I am the king of dragons, Katie. What happened to me at that time? I actually said such shameful words. Katie's face turned red and she was a little irritated. She walked away from the mirror, walked to the bed, and sat down. After living for so long, this was the first time she was so upset. Katie felt her face getting hot. That's emotion. No matter how powerful your technology is and your genes are advanced, you can't control your emotions. A voice slowly sounded. Hearing this sound, Katie's heart froze, and she looked towards the source of the sound. Seeing Chen Tao standing there, Katie was startled. She stood up and said, "What are you doing here? Didn't you reject me?" As she said that, Katie looked at Chen Tao and turned around slightly. With his back to Chen Tao, Katie thought to herself, "What am I doing? What am I doing with my back to him?" Suddenly, my waist tightened slightly. Katie's heart froze, and she quickly turned around, only to find that Chen Tao's face was very close to hers. Eyes facing each other. Chen Tao smiled slightly, bent down, and picked up Katie horizontally. Katie was startled, and she looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao put Katie on the bed, and he approached Katie. Their faces were very close. Katie was confused, her face flushed, and she looked at Chen Tao uneasily, saying, "What do you want to do? Are you crazy?" Chen Tao held Katie's hand, he looked into Katie's eyes, and said, "Don't you love me?" Katie was startled, she looked at Chen Tao's face. The two looked at each other. Chen Tao looked into her eyes and said with a smile, "Then prove to me, how much you love me." Katie's face was hot. What do you want to do?" Chen Tao looked at Katie and said, "I am a man, and you are a beautiful woman. Now we are like this, I think I should have no second choice." Katie's face became even redder. "Don't be silly." "I'm not silly," Chen Tao said with a smile. It turns out that Katie can blush, and she can show such a shy little woman's posture. The Dragon King Kati, who was so high and mighty before, has become so cute at this moment. Kati didn't know what to do. She looked around and turned her face slightly, not daring to look at Chen Tao. She looked so cute when she was shy. Chen Tao said gently in her ear, "Don't be afraid, I will treat you well." She closed her eyes and stopped talking. Her hands softened. She didn't struggle or resist. She looked like she was letting Chen Tao do whatever he wanted. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 145. 5 hours passed. Chen Tao looked at Katie in his arms. Katie closed her eyes and rested her head in Chen Tao's arms, her cheeks filled with dizziness. At this moment, Katie, who seemed to be aloof before, became as weak as a little woman. Chen Tao stroked her back and held her little hand. Chen Tao looked at the beautiful face in front of him. Chen Tao had said before that love is not just about appearance, but it is undeniable that appearance really plays a big part. A girl as good looking as Katie throws herself into her arms, and I believe even a man can't resist her. What's more, Chen Tao was just a poor man from the slums who was worse than ordinary people. But there was always a voice in his heart that made him resist this, but he couldn't accept the thought that if he rejected her, she might end up with other men in the future. Perhaps this is what a man is if he has a desire to possess beautiful women. Katie leaned her little head on Chen Tao's arms, and she didn't say anything. Maybe she didn't know what to say at this moment. Chen Tao said softly, "Then you are mine now." Katie fluttered her eyelashes and slowly opened her big eyes filled with moisture. She raised her face and looked at Chen Tao's face. She looked away, slowly leaned her little head on Chen Tao's arms, and said, "Treat me well." She whispered her little request. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Okay, I promise to treat you well." Katie closed her eyes and said, "Our dragon civilization may be a little different from other civilizations. It turns out that male dragons are in power here. In most cases, Women are in charge inside and men are in charge outside. Women serve their lovers as their biggest job. Although the female dragons have become warriors now, this has never changed. Even if I am the king of dragons, I am just a little woman next to you. She spoke softly, as if she was talking in her sleep, very softly and gently. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Actually, your clothes are too conservative. You can wear something special next time. Will you listen to this request?" If it were Rose, she would probably listen, but the person in her arms was Katie, the king of dragons. She was dignified and noble, so of course she would not obey such a request. Chen Tao just wanted to see her blushing and resisting. A blush appeared on Katie's face. She was silent for a moment, hesitated, and hummed softly, "I will listen to you." Chen Tao's request was a bit excessive and even disrespectful. After all, it was her own right to wear whatever clothes she wanted. But faced with such a request, Katie agreed. Just like she said, even if she is the king of dragon civilization, beside him, she is just his little woman. Very unexpected. She actually agreed. Chen Tao smiled and couldn't help but feel the love for her in his heart. He leaned forward and kissed Katie's forehead. Feeling the man's affection, a smile appeared on Katie's face, and she slowly closed her eyes. At first, she approached Chen Tao in order to obtain his genes and give birth to a male dragon with powerful genes. But things are different now. For Katie, feelings are also something she cannot control. Chen Tao's domineering and gentleness reminded her of her other identity besides the Dragon King, that is, a woman. She is a woman, and she also needs people to love her. It's just that after being the king of dragons for too long, she sometimes forgets, but now she is completely awakened by Chen Tao. Just a little tired, Katie felt tired. Accompanying this man was much more tiring than maintaining the balance of the universe. Chen Tao looked at Katie in his arms. Katie had her eyes closed and was asleep. Looking at the beautiful little face in his arms, Chen Tao smiled and gently touched her cheek with his hand. It turns out that this woman who is always so arrogant and serious also has such a weak side. Chen Tao didn't think too much and just stayed with her for a while. Thinking of this, he hugged Katie gently and rested with her. Don't know how long. Chen Tao slowly opened his eyes and looked at the unfamiliar ceiling above. His eyebrows stretched slightly, he turned his face and looked around him. But he found that the girl who was lying next to him before was gone. However, Chen Tao could still smell a little fragrance, which was the residual body fragrance on her body. Chen Tao's hand fell on the place where she had just been lying, where there was still a little body temperature. Chen Tao sat up and leaned against the bed. At this time, Chen Tao heard the movement. He looked toward the door. Upon seeing it, Chen Tao's eyes lit up slightly. Katie seemed to have just finished taking a shower and walked in from the bathroom. Chen Tao saw Katie in front of him. Katie was wearing a thin suspender nightgown that clung to her mature and proud figure. This nightgown was much less conservative than the one she wore before. Chen Tao smiled. Katie's face turned slightly red as she met Chen Tao's gaze. Chen Tao stood up and came to Katie's side. Katie's cheeks turned red. She lowered her head in embarrassment and said, "I listen to you and don't dress so conservatively. It's just that I've never worn such clothes before, so I'm not used to it." Chen Tao smiled, raised his hand, held her face, and said with a smile, "It's beautiful, very beautiful." Katie looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao raised his hand and held Katie in his arms. Katie nestled in Chen Tao's arms, looking at Chen Tao with her beautiful big eyes. Chen Tao put her on the bed, and Katie looked at Chen Tao without leaving her for a moment. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Come on, let your man love you." Katie blushed, looking slightly sideways, not daring to look at this man more. So cute. Obedient Katie is simply irresistibly adorable. Chen Tao felt like he was addicted to Katie like this. Time passes little by little. The fifth day that Chen Tao and Katie established their relationship. In a hot spring with white mist. Bai Yao, the former White Dragon King, was soaking in the hot spring. She looked at Katie next to her. Katie was also soaking in the hot spring, but Bai Yao could clearly feel the difference in Katie. In the past, Katie was casual and elegant, with a warrior-specific sharpness all over her body, but now when Katie was soaking in the hot spring, she was staring at the sky in a daze, and her beautiful face had an extra dimension. A real style unique to mature women. Looking at Katie, Bai Yao blinked, she smiled, and said, "You and Chen Tao have been staying in your bedroom for the past 5 days. What have you done? Have you told Chen Tao secrets? Dig some out." Secret? Katie was slightly startled, and she looked at Bai Yao. Bai Yao was stunned for a moment and said, "Isn't it right? It's been 5 days and you haven't asked him anything." Katie was startled, then blushed, and said, "In those 5 days, he only cared about me, that." At this point, she paused, but her face turned redder. Bai Yao blinked her eyes. She looked at Katie's cheeks flushed. She smiled and said, "You said before that there is no man in the known universe who can match you. Now it seems that is not the case. Ours, even the king of dragons, sometimes falls under the charm of a man." When Katie heard this, she looked at Bai Yao and said, "How can you understand that feeling, but you will know it when you have a man. Being with him is even more tiring than when I faced Rose." Bai Yao smiled and said, "Is it tiring? But I wonder why you enjoy it so much." Katie rolled her eyes at Bai Yao. She slowly withdrew her gaze, looked at the sky, and said, "Actually, it's a little tiring, but when she is held in his arms and hurt by him, it feels wonderful. He makes I remember my original identity as a woman." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 146. When I was in his arms, I knew for sure that I belonged to him. She said softly as if she was talking to herself, "The feeling of being owned by him really made me addicted." Kati raised her hand, looked at her white palm, and watched the water droplets from the hot spring falling along her fingers into the hot spring. She said, "I don't belong to myself, but to him, as if I was born for him. It's like these 9 million years of boring life are just waiting for him to appear. That feeling is wonderful." "You're done." Suddenly, Bai Yao's voice sounded beside her. Kati was startled, and she looked at Bai Yao. Bai Yao smiled and said, "You're done. Look at you now, you are just like those girls in love. It seems that there is no one else except your man." Kati retracted her gaze and said, "It's over, anyway, for me now, he is everything to me. I will do whatever he wants me to do." Bai Yao was stunned. She never thought that she would hear such words from the proud and dignified Katie. Katie actually completely regarded Chen Tao as everything to him. Bai Yao opened his mouth, wanting to remind her of her identity as the Dragon King and her duty to maintain the balance of the world. But looking at Kati's appearance of being immersed in happiness, Bai Yao didn't know how to say it. Thinking back, the universe is still quite peaceful now. Let Kati enjoy this simple life. Chen Tao's life is quite comfortable. After confirming the relationship between Kati and him, Chen Tao stayed in his base number 1 as usual. When he missed Kati, he asked her to come and accompany him. He was fine, so he lived a leisurely life with the girls in base number 1. Time passed by little by little. 1 month later. In base number 1. Chen Tao lay on the bed, looking at the ceiling. In Chen Tao's arms, Kati nestled in Chen Tao's arms like a kitten. Chen Tao looked at Kati beside him, and Kati's starry eyes were half closed. Chen Tao gently stroked her hair and said, "Rose has been promoted to the 4th generation of genes, and you seem to be still the third generation. Do you want me to help you? Kadi said, hubby, the genes you gave me should be enough. If I want, I can be promoted to the fourth generation at any time, but I don't want to be so anxious. It takes time to advance, and I want to spend that time on you. Kadi said with her eyes closed. Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled. At this moment, Katie slowly opened her eyes, and there was a hint of luster in her eyes. She pursed her lips, and there was a hint of displeasure on her face. Kadi's expression changed, and Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, and said, "What's wrong?" Kadi said, "I just heard the message from Jiao that a spirit appeared in Baiun civilization." Phantom. It was the first time that Chen Tao heard this word. He looked at Kadi. "What is that?" Kadi snuggled into Chen Tao's arms and said, "The two main forms in this universe are our gene body and the gene body we met before. The charm spirit is half a gene body, but it is somewhat different from the gene body. Their genes have special genetic functions. They can feel the power of nature and use the power of nature at the same time. For example, control wind, control water, control plant growth and so on. However, the number of charm spirits is even rarer than elemental bodies, so we won't pay too much attention to them. It's just that the charm spirit that Jiao mentioned seems to be slaughtering the gene body of Baiun civilization." Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. "It's interesting. Kadi is the king of dragon people, and many things that are happening in the known universe will be told to Kadi by the dragon people. In other words, Kadi is a centralized center of information. When she is by Chen Tao's side, Chen Tao can get a lot of special news. And as long as Chen Tao asks, Kadi will not hide it." Chen Tao looked at Katie and said with a smile, "Then what? Do you want to go?" Kadi said, "No, the spirit can only use the power of nature. Those powers cannot hurt the second generation gene body now. Just let a dragon man go and it will be solved." Chen Tao said, "Can you see the current situation of the spirit?" Kadi raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. She smiled and said, "If my husband wants to see it, of course he can." As she said that, she turned slightly and raised her hand. In front of Chen Tao, a floating blue screen appeared. Through the screen, you can see the scene in the screen. In the screen, there was a woman standing. What's the situation with this woman? This woman was wrapped in a thin gauze, which was close to her perfect figure. When she grasped her waist, her bust was amazing, and her legs were slender and straight, and it was estimated that they were at least 1.2 meters long. Her skin was like solidified fat, and with her perfect figure, she looked extremely beautiful. She has white hair, which is smooth, healthy, and full of luster. Under her bangs is a delicate face with phoenix eyes, a high nose bridge and a cherry mouth. Her temperament is charming and enchanting, just like fine wine. Chen Tao also noticed that the woman has a pair of furry ears on her head and a furry tail behind her. It looks like a fox's tail. At this time, the woman waved her hand, and a 3-meter-wide invisible wind blade appeared in front of her. The wind blade flew directly past, and the people in armor in front were cut off. A large group of people were cut into two. At this time, a group of people pulled bows and arrows in the distance and aimed them at the woman. "Don't use bows and arrows, don't hurt her, she is a great beauty, and it will not be beautiful if you hurt her." A man as strong as a bear said this. The man was wearing armor and riding a horse. He looked at the woman in the distance through the armor, and his eyes showed a luster that only men can understand. Seeing this, Chen Tao roughly understood. The woman was a spirit body. The reason why she slaughtered genes was because the humans of the Nebula civilization were attracted by the woman's beauty. "No surprise," Katie said. Chen Tao looked at Katie. Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, "In addition to the special genes of the charm spirits, both men and women have irresistible beauty, so we call them charm spirits." Charm spirits. Charm means charm, and spirit means creature. Charm spirits are charming creatures. Katie looked at the situation in the picture and said, charm spirits are parasitic on the gene body, but because of their appearance and special abilities, their lives are always full of twists and turns. There are even some terrifying existences that threaten civilization. There was a place called Blue Star Civilization, and a charm spirit was born there. As a result, the charm spirit went crazy. The entire civilization was slaughtered by it in half a year. Katie said, for this reason, our dragon civilization considered intervening in the management of charm spirits. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 147. How to manage. Chen Tao looked at Katie. Katie said, first, appease them. If you can't appease them, for the sake of the prosperity of that civilization, just kill them. Chen Tao frowned and said, isn't this too cruel? Katie said, perhaps for her, some people in that civilization deserve to die, but that doesn't mean that the entire civilization deserves to die. If it's too crazy, we must balance it. What Katie said does make sense. Chen Tao looked through the screen at the enchanting woman inside and fell into silence. But is this too cruel? After all, from a certain perspective, the charming spirit is the victim. Chen Tao didn't think much about it and watched the situation develop quietly. Charming spirit is half a genetic body, but unlike a genetic body, she is born with genetic functions in her body. Those genetic functions allow them to be born with the power to control nature's program codes. Therefore, enchantments can control things that exist in nature. In front of charming spirit, there were thousands of soldiers wearing armor and holding spears. Those should be the warriors of the Bayun civilization. It seems that the Bayun civilization is still in the era of cold weapons. It uses cold weapons to deal with a charm that can control the power of nature. Apparently they were overthinking it. The spirit's eyes glowed blue, and groups of wind blades flew past. Thousands of humans were harvested by wind blades. The spirit seemed to be angry. She walked forward, her white furry tail swaying behind her. The strong wind pushed Mei Ling's ears back, and the gauze on her body clung to her slender figure. She controlled the wind blade, and the wind blade harvested ruthlessly, like a sickle harvesting rice, killing people as soon as it slid by. The man sitting on the horse seemed to have changed his face slightly from feeling the pressure. The commander of the archers quickly looked at the man and said, King, what should we do? The man who was called the king narrowed his eyes and said, Archer, enter. When the commander heard this, he shouted loudly, shoot. The archer loosened his grip, took off the bow and arrow, and shot at the enchanting spirit. The spirit refused to hide, and a protective shield made of wind appeared on its body. As soon as the bow and arrow hit the protective shield, it was blown away by the wind formed by the protective shield. The bow and arrow could not penetrate the phantom's protective shield at all. Charming spirit frowned, then stepped on the ground with her bare feet. She stepped on the wind and flew forward. Wind blades surrounded her, frantically harvesting the lives of enemies around her. The demon's gaze was fixed on the man sitting on the horse in the distance. The man called the king was her target. Withdraw! Withdraw! The king looked horrified and shouted loudly. After shouting, he pulled the reins of the horse and turned around to run away. Suddenly, the wind blade flew past and struck directly at the king's head. The king's head fell to the ground. The figure of the enchantress appeared on the horse, and her bare feet stepped on the horse's back. Chen Tao noticed now that there was a thin anklet on Mei Ling's ankle, and there was a small bell on the anklet. Charming spirit's silky white hair was fluttering. She stared coldly at the people below and said, you all must die. The wind blade circulated and slashed at the people below. Ah! Withdraw! Run away, don't block my way. Ah, it hurts. Panic and panic screams and wails sounded on the battlefield. Broken limbs were horribly mutilated, blood flowed, and death was everywhere. When Chen Tao watched this scene, he felt as if he was watching TV, with no emotional fluctuations. Suddenly, just then, a meteorite appears in the sky within the screen. Meteors burst into flames and fell from the sky. This scene attracted the attention of everyone around. Everyone took a closer look, and when the fireball fell into the air, the flames dispersed, revealing a figure. The person who came was someone from the dragon civilization. This dragon, Chen Tao knew, seemed to be the female dragon who held a sword on his neck before. Katie called her Qin. God. It is our God who has come to save us. God, save us, this woman is a monster, she is not human. Those people quickly knelt down to Long Renkin and begged loudly. But the enchanting spirit was still standing on the horse, raising his face and looking directly at the Dragon King Qin above. Long Renkin glanced at the dead people, her eyes fell on Mei Ling, and said lightly, "You have killed all the people who bullied you before. These people are innocent, so just let them go and let them go, let them go." When Charming heard this, she said coldly, "Let them go. Then when they pointed their spears and bows and arrows at me, did they let me go? These are King Tez's minions, and they must die." As she spoke, she raised her hand and slashed the crowd in front with a wind blade. The figure of Long Renkin appeared in front of the wind blade and waved the long sword in his hand. Bang! The wind blade was cut off in response. Long Renkin looked at Mei Ling and said, "Charming spirit, I am here to maintain the balance. Your existence has destroyed the balance. If you are still stubborn, then I can only punish you." When Mei Ling heard this, she frowned. "Maintain the balance, why didn't you come to maintain the balance when I was bullied? Why didn't you come to maintain the balance when I was cornered? Until now. I want to win, and I can take revenge on them. But you are here to maintain the balance. You gods are obviously on the side of King Tez. You are just a bunch of bastards." Mei Ling's face was cold, and she said, "Also, my name is not Mei Ling, my name is Fang Sweking." Blood blades condensed, and groups of invisible wind blades slashed at Long Renkin from all directions. Long Renkin waved the silver-white long sword in her hand, and the long sword swung. After cutting off countless wind blades, she stared at Fang Sweking and said, "Since you are stubborn, don't blame me for being rude." The dragon wings behind Long Renkin spread out, swept towards Fang Sweking, and the long sword in her hand rolled and slashed towards Fang Sweking's throat. Fang Sweking's eyes were filled with despair, and she slowly closed her eyes. Death is very near. But Fang Sweking's mind is blank now. Looking back on her life, she feels more and more that she is a mistake. Since she was born, she has been regarded as a monster all her life. She was born with ears and a tail. She was abandoned by her parents at birth and thrown into the mountains. She is with the wealth wolf and lives with death every day. After growing up and entering the human world, she thought she could live happily and make her own world. But because of her beauty, she was targeted by King Tez. She was almost raped by King Tez, so she could only choose to escape. In the end, she couldn't escape and was forced to do nothing. She chose to fight back. She never expected that at this time, the gods came from the sky to punish her. Fang Sweking didn't understand, is this world so unfair? She was bullied, and no one stood up. Some people even said that she deserved it and said that she was a monster. Now she took action and was punished by the gods. I can't figure it out. I might as well die like this. Fang Sweking thought. Suddenly, Fang Sweking felt her waist tighten and lighten, and she felt that she was held up by someone. She came back to her senses and opened her eyes, but she saw a handsome face. A man was holding her. Fang Sweking was stunned. Who is this man? My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 148. Long Renkin didn't kill Fang Sweking. She was slightly startled and looked forward. Seeing the person coming, there was a hint of doubt in her eyes. Chen Tao. Chen Tao hugged Fang Shueqing, looked at Long Renken, and said, I don't like the way you handle it. Leave her to me. You can go back. Long Renken was slightly startled. She frowned and said, she is emotionally unstable and will go berserk like that at any time. In that case, other genetic bodies will be harmed and must be dealt with. Even if it's you, I'm sorry, I still can't give her to you, Long Renken said. Chen Tao frowned slightly. Suddenly, Long Renken seemed to realize something and put his hand to his ear. Queen, okay. Long Renken seemed to be talking to herself and said something. She glanced at Chen Tao, then spread her dragon wings and flew away. Chen Tao watched Long Renken's figure disappear before his eyes. He withdrew his gaze and looked at Long Renken in his arms. Long Renken's big eyes looked at Chen Tao. After looking at her like this, Chen Tao noticed that her eyes were blue, like two blue gems. White hair, creamy skin, matched with that beautiful face, red phoenix eyes, cherry lips. Mature and perfect soft figure. This woman is so enchanting. Fang Shueqing looked into Chen Tao's eyes. She was rescued. Fang Shueqing was rescued by someone for the first time in her life. Many people regarded her as a monster, beat her and scolded her, even though her parents abandoned her after she was born. The only person willing to get close to her is a bastard who wants to taint her and use her as a plaything. Now this is the first time he has been rescued. For Fang Shueqing, the man in front of her was something special. Chen Tao looked into her eyes and said, are you okay? Chen Tao landed on the ground and slowly put Fang Shueqing down. He noticed Fang Shueqing's bare feet and said, wouldn't it hurt if you step on the ground like this? When Fang Shueqing heard this, she looked at Chen Tao, then at her little feet. She shook her head gently and said, the earth is my friend, it will not hurt me. I almost forgot, this woman is an enchantment, she can control the power of nature, and the natural earth, as a part of nature, will certainly not harm her. Realizing this, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, and his eyes couldn't help but fall on her. The thin gauze fit Fang Shueqing's figure. Her figure was so perfect, and her appearance was so beautiful. Her temperament is so charming and enchanting, so charming. Just wearing this gauze is not good. Chen Tao raised his hand and used his genetic power to create a thin shirt. It can only be a shirt, after all, it is too hot to wear a jacket. Chen Tao pulled up his shirt, walked to her side, and raised his hand. Feeling Chen Tao's movements, Fang Shueqing subconsciously took a step back, keeping a distance from Chen Tao. She looked at Chen Tao, what do you want to do? Hearing this, Chen Tao couldn't help but smile and said, don't worry about me, I won't hurt you. Fang Shueqing looked at Chen Tao and pursed her lower lip. Chen Tao came closer and put the shirt on her body. Give me your hand. Fang Shueqing didn't resist much and let Chen Tao hold her little hand. So soft, Fang Shueqing's hands were simply boneless. Chen Tao helped her put on the shirt. After putting on her shirt, Fang Shueqing looked at the shirt. Her eyes were filled with luster. She looked at Chen Tao and said, who are you? I have never seen the fabric of this dress before. Hearing this, Chen Tao said, I come from another planet. Planet? What is that? Fang Shueqing's eyes were filled with confusion. Chen Tao was silent for a moment. Also, Fang Shueqing's planet was in the Cold Weapon Age, and people in this era had no concept of a planet at all. Chen Tao said, simply put, I come from above. He pointed to the sky. Fang Shueqing frowned, looked at Chen Tao, and said, are you from the same place as the woman with the horns? She seemed a little unhappy. It's obvious that she hates that woman with horns. Chen Tao smiled and said, she and I are not from the same place. There are many places up there, and I come from one of them. And don't worry, she and I are not from the same place. I don't like her way of dealing with things. Then what method do you prefer? Fang Xueqing looked at Chen Tao warily. Chen Tao looked at Fang Xueqing's somewhat wary eyes. Chen Tao was silent for a moment. He crossed his arms over his chest and thought for a moment. He looked at Fang Xueqing and said, "Come with me, I will take you somewhere." Fang Xueqing's eyes were filled with confusion. "Where?" Chen Tao said, "People in this world have narrow vision. They regard you as a monster, but in my opinion, it is not like that. You are beautiful, not a monster, but a lovely girl." Fang Xueqing was slightly startled. She looked at Chen Tao and pursed her lower lip. "It's useless for you to praise me." "Is it really useless?" "No, Fang Xueqing has been treated as a monster since she was a child. She longs for someone to recognize her and for someone to treat her as a person, not a monster, let alone a plaything." What Chen Tao said touched Fang Xueqing's sensitive nerves. Chen Tao said, "I want to let you go and take you to my world. In the world where I am, no one will look down on you, and no one will treat you as a monster. You will live there as a woman being, live happily." Fang Xueqing's eyes lit up slightly, and the furry fox tail behind her swayed slowly. She looked straight at Chen Tao and said, "Is there really such a place?" Chen Tao smiled and said, "Of course there is, but that place is not in the world under your feet. As long as you follow me, I can take you to that place." As he said, he stretched out his hand to Fang Xueqing, "As long as you give me your hand." Fang Xueqing looked at Chen Tao's hand, she pursed her lips, and slowly placed her hand in Chen Tao's palm. Suddenly, the surrounding environment changed. Chen Tao took Fang Xueqing to base number 1. This is in the hall inside base number 1. The hall is very large and spacious. This is where He Yuxuan and others relax and watch TV when they are free. There is a TV screen in front that is as big as a movie screen. Seeing this TV screen, Fang Xueqing's eyes glowed with a hint of light. "Husband!" Suddenly, a voice came. Chen Tao looked back and saw Ziking sitting on the sofa, looking at this side. In addition to Ziking, He Yuxuan, Li Xiaolu, Lin and Rose were all there. Their eyes were attracted by the sudden appearance of Chen Tao and Fang Xueqing. "Husband, who is that big sister?" Li Xiaolu's eyes reflected a white luster, and her eyes stared straight at the fluffy ears on Fang Xueqing's head and the fluffy tail behind Fang Xueqing. Fang Xueqing was a little uneasy, and she looked at Chen Tao. On the planet where Fang Xueqing was, everyone saw Fang Xueqing and threw things at her, treating her like a monster. What about these people in front of them? Will they be like that too? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 149. Chen Tao said, "Her name is Fang Xueqing, she is from the Nebula civilization. Xiaolu, you can just call her Sister Xueqing. For the rest, just call her by her name." When Li Xiaolu heard this, she smiled. She stood up, looked at Fang Xueqing, and said with a smile, "Sister Xueqing, my name is Li Xiaolu." "Sister Xueqing, you are so beautiful." Fang Xueqing was stunned. She was stunned for a moment and looked at Li Xiaolu. Fang Xueqing was puzzled. Not only did this person not throw things at her, but he even praised her for being beautiful. Incredible. Hello. Ziking also stood up. She looked at Fang Xueqing and said with a smile, "My name is Ziking." "My name is He Yuxuan." He Yuxuan also spoke. Rose looked at Fang Xueqing, showed a playful smile, and said, "My name is Rose." Lin looked at Fang Xueqing. Noticing Lin, Fang Xueqing frowned slightly and was a little nervous. Lin also smiled kindly at Fang Xueqing and said, "Just call me Lin." Rose stood up and said with a smile, "Then we will be sisters from now on." "Sister Xueqing, come and sit here with me. Let's talk about how you met Chen Tao." Rose walked to Fang Xueqing, took her hand, and led her to that side. Fang Shueqing was a little overwhelmed, but she didn't refuse. Rose came to her and sat on the sofa. Fang Shueqing was stunned. She looked at Chen Tao and was a little overwhelmed. Chen Tao smiled and said, "They will be your good friends. Have fun. Don't be afraid. They won't hurt you." Fang Shueqing nodded slightly. This was the first time Fang Shueqing encountered such a situation. It was completely different from before. In the past, people would either throw things at Fang Shueqing or hide under their own beds when they saw her. Who would dare to do this like now? Not only did he not throw things at Fang Shueqing, but he was also so enthusiastic towards her. This enthusiasm was pure enthusiasm without hostility. Fang Shueqing didn't know how to deal with this situation. She had never encountered such a thing before. After seeing this, Chen Tao turned around and left. Back to the bedroom. Chen Tao looked and found Katie sitting on the bed, leaning against the headboard. She looked at Chen Tao, smiled and said, "I'm surprised you would intervene." Chen Tao was silent for a moment and said, "The way you deal with the spirit is too rough." Katie nodded slightly and said, "I admit it is rough, but we are warriors and we can't always judge things based on emotions. In the situation just now, for us, sacrificing her would save a civilization. We would not have a second choice between her and civilization." Chen Tao sat next to Katie and said, "Life is precious. The value of every life is immeasurable, and the value of a life is not determined by quantity." He looked at Katie and said, "If I have to choose between civilization and you, I would rather choose you." Katie was startled. She looked at Chen Tao. Her moving eyes were filled with moisture. She smiled and said, "I am very touched." As she spoke, she leaned into Chen Tao's arms. Chen Tao raised his hand, gently hugged her shoulders, and stroked her arm. Katie pursed her lips and said softly, "Hubby, you are not interested in being the king of the dragon civilization." Chen Tao was startled. He looked at Katie. "What do you mean? The king of the dragon civilization, what is she going to do?" Katie said softly, "The dragon civilization has not had a male king for a long time, and the dragon civilization needs a male king." She raised her face, looked at Chen Tao, and said with a smile, "The dragon civilization is now full of women. In your words, it is the yin is strong and the yang is weak. If there is a man to balance it, you are strong and masculine, and at the same time very kind. You are very suitable. And I told you before." Katie looked at Chen Tao and said with a smile, "I always think you are very suitable to be in charge of the dragon civilization." Chen Tao shook his head and said, "Everything else is easy to say, just spare me this." Wasn't this going to kill Chen Tao? His dream was to live a relaxed, happy and leisurely life, but Katie planned to let Chen Tao be in charge of the dragon civilization and become the king of the dragons. This joke was not funny to Chen Tao. Katie pursed her lips, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "But husband, if this happens, our dragon civilization will still encounter things like what happened just now when we maintain the balance of the universe. In that kind of thing, according to our rules, it is not like you, husband, to take her in so gently. Of course, if you become the new king of dragons." Katie looked at Chen Tao with big eyes and said with a smile, "You can do whatever you want to those female dragons. No matter what the king's order is, it is absolute." If the pervert heard her words, he would probably be boiling. For some reason, those who have advanced genes have good figures and looks, and those female dragons with second-generation genes are the most beautiful. If Chen Tao is replaced by those lustful people, it is estimated that the dragon civilization will not be the dragon civilization. Chen Tao shook his head and said, "I said, everything else is easy to talk about, but I will never accept this. Chen Tao can't manage the affairs of the dragon civilization. It's better to let him die than to let him manage the universe." Seeing Chen Tao insisting so much, Katie had no choice. Suddenly, Chen Tao's consciousness was pulled away. His sight saw a picture. A huge crack appeared in the dark universe. Then, he saw a huge black monster that looked like a humpback whale slowly swimming out of the huge crack. This monster was very huge, and black mist was coming out of its body. That was dark energy creature, Chen Tao said subconsciously. Chen Tao's consciousness returned to his body. What's wrong? Katie's voice sounded in his arms. Katie looked at Chen Tao with doubts in her eyes. Chen Tao frowned and said, what you are worried about is here. Katie frowned suddenly. Dark energy creature you saw. Chen Tao nodded slightly. Katie came out of Chen Tao's arms, she got off the bed, and hurriedly put on the armor. After she put it on, she looked at Chen Tao. But she found that Chen Tao was frowning. Looking at Chen Tao's expression, Kadi said, what's wrong? Chen Tao said, that dark energy creature is different from the ones we encountered before. The last time we encountered a dark energy creature, it had the breath of an element, and I could feel that it had the breath of an elemental body, but this time I sensed it in the universe, but it didn't. Kadi frowned suddenly, and she said, let's go to Dragon City first. I have instruments there that can observe the true appearance of the new dark energy creature. We can analyze it there. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 150. Chen Tao actually wanted to sleep at home, but seeing how nervous Katie was, it's hard for him to say that he doesn't want to go. After all, Katie is now his woman, and her affairs can be considered his business. Chen Tao got out of bed and put on his clothes. Katie had already put on her clothes. Seeing Chen Tao's slow look, she smiled and said, I'm here to help you. With that said, Katie walked to Chen Tao and gently served Chen Tao to get dressed. Get dressed. Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, the micro wormhole I set up using the Dragon King's Academy cannot achieve such a long space jump. You need to do this, so it can be faster. Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Katie. This was the first time Chen Tao knew about this. It turned out that even Wan Kadi, a member of the dragon civilization, was unable to achieve that kind of long-distance wormhole teleportation. Chen Tao raised his hand and opened a miniature wormhole. The two of them left together through the micro wormhole. The micro wormhole slowly closed. When Chen Tao appeared again, he appeared in the main hall of Dragon City. There is no one in the entire hall now. This hall is where Kadi usually holds meetings with other dragon people in the morning. At this time, there is naturally no one. Katie watched the micro wormhole next to her slowly dissipate. She raised her hand and opened another micro wormhole again. She walked in minding her own business. When Chen Tao saw this, he followed Katie in. Appearing again, Chen Tao's eyes lit up slightly when he saw the scene in front of him. This is a spacious room. There is an oval-shaped table in the middle of the room. The middle of the table is slightly concave. The entire table is better said to be a table-shaped high-tech equipment. This device projects a 3D image above. Through the 3D image, you can see a dark mini-universe, and within this darkness, a creature that looks like a humpback whale is swimming in this dark universe. Moving. This scene is almost exactly the same as the one Chen Tao perceived just now. Standing next to the table was a woman wearing armor, it was Bai Yao. Bai Yaozhen was crossing his chest with his hands, his face full of solemnity and seriousness. She noticed Chen Tao and Katie coming. Bai Yao glanced at Chen Tao, his eyes fell on Katie, and said, Queen. Katie said, how's it going? Bai Yao withdrew his gaze, looked at the scene in front of him, and said, after you informed me, Queen, I came over immediately. I just analyzed this creature through the Dragon King's Academy. What's the result? Katie said. Bai Yao said, the result is unanalyzable. Can't analyze it, Katie was stunned. She looked at Bai Yao, even the Dragon King's Academy can't analyze it. Bai Yao nodded slightly and said, the things that make up this creature are not genes or elements. Dark energy, KD said. Bai Yao nodded slightly and said, it is possible that we cannot analyze only dark energy. If this is the case, then this creature is a purer dark energy creature than before. KD frowned and said, I wonder if this creature is intelligent. Being intelligent means being able to communicate. If you can communicate, you can get something from it that they don't know. After all, this creature that suddenly appeared was full of mystery. I can understand a little bit and say some good things. Bai Yao said, if you want to know, you need to come into contact with it, this thing feels very dangerous. Hearing this, KD fell silent for a moment. I'll do it suddenly, a voice came from beside him. KD and Bai Yao looked at Chen Tao together. Chen Tao said, being idle is also boring. Bai Yao was stunned for a moment. She frowned and said, this is a dark energy creature. It is no joke to face it face to face. In front of it, even third generation genes will die. KD on the side also looked at Chen Tao. Dark energy creatures are unknown existences. For us, dark energy creatures are full of mystery. We cannot underestimate the enemy, KD said softly. Chen Tao could feel KD's worry. Chen Tao smiled, gently stroked her hair and said, if I don't go, only the two of you will go. If you go, I won't be able to bear it. If she goes, I think the risk is not low. Chen Tao looked at KD and said, so, it's better for me to go. At least I have the confidence to protect myself. KD said, that's good. Chen Tao nodded slightly and was about to teleport over. Tao, KD said. Chen Tao looked at KD, who looked at Chen Tao and said, nothing will happen. Chen Tao smiled and said, okay, I promise to come back alive. Don't worry, I won't let you become a widow. KD's face turned slightly red and she looked at Chen Tao with a glint in her eyes. Chen Tao's mind moved, and his figure disappeared from the spot. When he reappeared, Chen Tao's figure appeared in space. He looked forward and saw the huge behemoth in front of him, like a dark humpback whale. Its size is huge, like a mountain. It has a pair of big, gurgling eyes. It stared at Chen Tao. Chen Tao entered the public genetic channel and said, can you hear me? If you want to know whether the other party is wise, you can only do it through communication. However, there was no response, and the huge creature was still coming this way. Chen Tao frowned and said, don't you have any wisdom? Chen Tao continued to speak on the public genetic channel, if you can hear it, just respond. While he was talking, the behemoth was already approaching Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at the huge creature in front of him, his eyebrows slightly stretched. When he discovered that Chen Tao was in front of him, suddenly, the huge creature suddenly opened its mouth. He opened his mouth and swallowed Chen Tao directly into its belly. Katie, who was watching the scene not far away, her face changed slightly. Tao. Noticing the change in Katie's demeanor, Bai Yao said, don't worry, Chen Tao's genetic aura has not disappeared, he is still alive. Katie looked ugly and said, that is a dark energy creature, and dark energy is a terrifying energy that even Fenyin can swallow. No matter how strong Chen Tao is, can his body withstand it? As she said that, Katie felt a little panicked, and she said, I'll go take a look. Bai Yao was startled, then she said, Wang, believe him, and it's useless now that you're gone. Katie was slightly startled, she frowned, and was about to speak. Don't worry, suddenly, a voice sounded in Katie's mind. Hearing this voice, Katie's eyes lit up slightly. Tao. It was Chen Tao's voice. Chen Tao said, I'm fine. Hearing Chen Tao's relaxed voice, Katie couldn't help but smile, that's great. Chen Tao's body was inside the huge beast. His feet were stepping on it, and it felt like stepping on the ground. This feels weird. Who are you? Why are you here, at this time, Chen Tao heard a voice on the genetic channel. Hearing the sound, Chen Tao looked towards the source of the sound. Chen Tao programmed a light, and the light lit up. Chen Tao saw a person.